New York City mayoral candidate Zoran Mamdani has proposed a plan to make all MTA local buses free. This, along with a number of agencies going fare-free in the wake of the pandemic, has pushed fare-free buses into public conversation. So let's look at the pros and cons of fare-free operations and see how one number can determine whether going fare-free makes sense. Let's be honest, fares are annoying, but for many transit systems, they provide a notable amount of an agency's operating budget. The figure that tells us how much money an agency receives from fares is called the Farebox recovery ratio. To determine the Farebox recovery ratio, you take the total fare revenue and then divide it by the total operating expenses. So transit agencies essentially have two pots of money. One is the operating budget, which is used to pay for the frontline workers and everyone else who keeps operations running day to day. The other budget is called the capital budget, which is used for purchasing new vehicles, keeping infrastructure like stations and tracks in good condition, or constructing a new maintenance facility. Fare revenue, along with advertising and local state subsidies, are usually used to fund operations, while grants and bonds are often used to fund capital projects, but this is a simple explanation. If you dig deeper, things get way more complicated, and it's beyond the scope of this video. Some transit agencies have higher farebox recovery ratios, like the Bay Area Rapid Transit, also known as BART, which in 2019 received 72% of its operating budget from fares. That is unusually high for the United States. Due to slow return to office and inflation, the most recent data available shows BART's farebox recovery ratio has fallen to just shy of 25%. So COVID changed these things a lot. Here are some pre- and post-pandemic farebox recovery ratios from various transit systems across the country. You'll notice that smaller systems and bus-only systems bring in a lot less fares than rail-based systems. There are a few reasons for this. 1. Rail systems often have higher fares and less fare evasion rates than buses. For example, in 2023, WMATA brought in about 4 times as much money from Metro Rail than from buses, even though their ridership was pretty similar. Number 2, rail operations are more cost efficient than buses, as one rail operator can transport up to around 1,000 people at once, while the largest buses can only fit around 100 people. Number 3, oftentimes more people ride rail systems than bus systems. In Q1 2025, there were 7 million unlinked passenger trips per day on the New York subway, but only 2.5 million on their buses. This tells us that small and bus-only transit systems are better candidates to go fare-free. So why does transit often require fares? I mean, most roads are free to drive, bike, or walk alongside. Well, motorized public transit, as we know it, was started by private streetcar companies in the late 1800s, which were of course money-making enterprises. At that time period, one could have a profitable company providing urban rail service, relying on a combination of passenger fares and income from individuals and businesses that rented or purchased property owned by the transit company. After World War II, many of these systems were simply not profitable anymore, and local governments took over transit operations. At the same time, many streetcar lines were being turned into buses. The whole demise of the American streetcar is a massive topic that I'm not going to get into, but there's plenty of resources out there if you want to learn more about it. So after local governments took over operation of transit systems, they kept the fares in place to partially fund the system, along with government funding. People who advocate for free fares often state that making transit free will assist low-income folks who often rely on transit, especially local buses. For example, 83% of Cleveland's RTA riders make under $50,000 a year. Another reason people support free fares is because it usually increases ridership, which is often one of the goals of most transit agencies. Many agencies went fare-free after the pandemic in order to entice riders to return, and some of these agencies have even seen higher ridership than before the pandemic. The claim is made by proponents of eliminating fares that free transit will entice people out of their cars, leading to less gaseous and noise pollution and a decrease in traffic. Unfortunately, the data proving that all this stuff happens because of a fare-free policy is murky at best. Making the bus free can also save the transit agency money. For example, in Prince George's County, it cost them about $4 million in fare-related expenses in order to just collect fares, but they only took in $200,000. And while Prince George's County does have a lot of fare evasion, even if you could get every single person to pay, there's still a chance that all of that money still would not equal the amount that it actually costs to collect the fares. It's clearly easier just to make the bus free, and they have actually gone ahead and done this. The last common claim that fare-free advocates make is that fare-free buses are faster because people just have to walk on the bus without taking the time to tap a card or to put money in the fare box. This also reduces dwell times, which is the amount of time that the vehicle sits unloading and loading passengers, which when compounded can decrease travel times and even lead to higher frequency service, which is a good thing. It shouldn't surprise you that there are also people who caution against instituting fully free fares. They don't necessarily oppose measures to make the cost burden on low-income people lesser, but they do oppose making fares free for literally everybody. Many oppose fare-free transit because if funding to replace fares is not found, then service cuts have to be made, making transit a worse option and giving people who rely on transit a worse experience, or no experience at all if the only route near them gets cut. They also oppose fare-free service because they point to data that says making transit free does not significantly lessen car usage. Most of the ridership that fare-free services see are from people who would have otherwise walked or biked instead. Another argument you may see from the fares are preferred camp is that fares help keep people on mind-altering substances and people who are homeless from spending time among passengers who may find their presence uncomfortable and deter them from riding. Confusion on what buses are free and which buses are paid can also be confusing as well. For example, in Prince George's County, Maryland, the county-run bus service is free, but Metrobus, run by WMATA, is still paid. This can cause confusion among people who aren't in the know and would be avoided if every service had a set fare. Boston has the same issue as well because the MBTA made bus routes 23, 28, and 29 fare-free until January 2026, while the rest of the buses cost $150. During the pandemic, DC eliminated bus fares to keep COVID from spreading, and then in 2023, the city of DC almost made all Metrobus within the city free of charge, but this program got canceled at the last minute. Metrobus in the DC area has only around 30% of people paying, according to WMATA, which isn't surprising to me at all after all of the confusion about bus fare changes. Announcing free fares, then canceling at the last minute confuses people who may not speak English or just doesn't follow the bus fare news very closely because not everyone does that. All this to say, going fare-free for a certain amount of time, this time meant for the pandemic, and then talking about going fare-free and then not doing it has caused issues, and has even got WMATA to seriously start policing fare evasion on buses. Anti-fare-free folks would say, well, you could have avoided all of this just by keeping fares. All right, let's go out into the real world and look at some case studies on fare-free buses and see how it went. The first fare-free service that I was made aware of was Dash in Alexandria, when I boarded one of their buses and the fare box was covered with a sign saying free. Alexandria is a Virginian city of over 150,000 people around 5 miles from Washington, D.C. They run their own buses and get just shy of 20,000 boardings per weekday in the summer of 2025. Back in 2019, the farebox recovery ratio on Dash was 21%, which is pretty high for a mid-sized bus system. But in the fall of 2021, the Alexandria City Council made Dash free by providing them $1.4 million to continue running while they applied for grants from higher orders of government. They eventually did receive a grant from the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transit through the Transit Ridership Incentive Program. The grant was $7.2 million, which would keep Dash fare free until fiscal year 2026. We are now in fiscal year 2026, so now the city has to find $2 million a year to keep the system running at its current service levels. So I wish them the best of luck in that endeavor. The stated goals of the Fare Free program were to assist low-income passengers, to increase ridership after COVID, to get rid of the administrative and technological costs associated with collecting fares, giving people less familiar with the bus to try out the new and improved Dash network that was introduced the same day as the free fares, and last but not least, to keep dwell times, which is the time that the vehicle is waiting, boarding, or alighting passengers, lower, because people wouldn't have to deal with fares, so they could just walk straight onto the bus. So what can we learn from Dash's Fare Free program? Well, if government is willing to find and allocate money that fares would cover, then even a bus system with a pretty high farebox recovery ratio can transition relatively smoothly into a fare-free system. But if the city does not receive more grants from higher orders of government, it will be on the hook for funding the system. This shows the dangers in doing things without a sustainable funding model that would ensure that the service be funded every year, such as a local tax. As I alluded to earlier, Montgomery County, Maryland runs their own bus system. For the longest time, the fare was $1, but in June of 2025, they officially made their service fare-free. This wasn't some insane change, because very few people were paying for the service. I remember I was entering a ride-on bus in Germantown, Maryland, grabbing my card to pay for the fare, and the driver said, "Don't worry about it. Due to the low fare of $1 and lots of fare evasion, their farebox recovery ratio was at 2%, and at that point it just wasn't worth it anymore to try to get people to pay or to pay for the fare collection systems. Due to the fact that very little of Montgomery County Ride-On's budget was coming in through fares, I don't see Montgomery County having too many issues going forward. Another success story is Blacksburg Transit, which runs the buses in Blacksburg and Christiansburg, Virginia. Around 90% of the riders are Virginia Tech students. Historically, students paid their fares through tuition, and the fare for everybody else was 50 cents per ride or $8 for a monthly pass. What a steal! Blacksburg Transit realized that they were only bringing in around $50,000 a year in standard fares, so City Council voted unanimously to get rid of them. Local City Council member Michael Sutphin stated, quote, "Regular bus fares were bringing in just $50,000 a year, less than 1% of Blacksburg Transit's annual budget, so we were able to absorb the costs of eliminating bus fares administratively without any problem." He also added that getting rid of fares has been popular with locals and bus operators as they don't have to worry about making people pay anymore. With Virginia Tech and various levels of government already funding 99% of service, it just made sense to eliminate fares for everyone. Unfortunately, not all of these case studies are positive. The Kansas City Area Transportation Authority runs the public transit in the Kansas City metro area, which covers both Missouri and Kansas. In March of 2020, they made all of their buses fare-free, which was made possible with more city funding and COVID relief from the federal government. However, 5 years later, the sales taxes to fund transit only generated $78 million, $15 million short of the $93 million that they need to continue running service without any cuts. In August of 2025, 4 months after a contract should have been signed, an 11th hour deal was made between the City Council and COPPA for that would fully fund transit for the year, but COPPA must reinstate fares for everyone who is not low income or on social services. As you would expect, many folks are not happy about this change and having to pay their fare. But personally, I think it's better to have a fare-based system that has more routes and better frequency than a free system with less routes and worse frequency. Kansas City should serve as a cautionary tale that when local government does not have the extra money or a tax doesn't generate enough revenue to cover standard operations, reinstating fares may be the only option to generate enough revenue to keep buses running at their current service levels, which in many cities is already just the bare minimum. So now we get to the question, should transit be fare-free? Well, I hate to be that guy, but there's no perfect criteria you have to hit to where a fare-free system will work out 100% of the time. But here's what I've learned from researching this video. 1. Fare-free systems are still relatively new, and we are not aware of all of the potential outcomes. 2. Smaller systems with low farebox recovery ratios are the best candidates to go fare-free. A good rule of thumb is that if fare revenue makes up less than 5% of your operating budget, then going fare-free may be a great way to improve transit in your community, and the financial burden should not be too bad. If it's 5 to 9%, then it very much depends, because it may be very difficult to get those extra funds even if it does not sound like that much. And if your farebox recovery ratio is over 10%, then it probably is not a great idea to remove fares, even though this has worked for systems like Dash and Alexandria. If that funding is gone, then you're going to have major reductions in service, or you have to reintroduce fares, and it's a whole thing, and it's just probably not worth it in the first place. As I've said before, the potential fatal flaw of fare-free transit is that service would have to be cut or fares would have to be reintroduced if funds cannot be found due to turmoil in local and state government, which just seems to be the norm these days. See Pennsylvania. Heck, even paid transit systems across the country are in danger of being cut or have already been cut due to lack of funding. All of the things I've talked about in this video are not hard and fast rules, and every city and transit provider is in its own situation. I just tried to explain the situations that surround fare-free transit, as this is a very complicated topic and may even be described as a wicked problem, which is a public problem that public policy tries to fix, but those fixes are never a one-and-done solution. What do you think of free fares? Let me know in the comments down below. I know this is a very divisive topic, especially depending on your socioeconomic status, the transit in your city, what you're used to, etc., etc. Be respectful in the comments, but do give me your opinions. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Adios.